Welcome to Athar's Garage. In this video, I'll be working on the Serpent SRX8 GTe long wheelbase bag 9. So let's get started. So bag 9 is gonna help us install our electronics. So I've got my motor, ESC, and servo ready to install. So it looks like there's a few small bags within bag 9 itself. Be careful opening up the small bags because there are some very small screws and parts in them. Alright, so the first thing we're going to install looks like the battery hold downs in the center of the vehicle. So we can grab those. They're going to be these plastic pieces that look like this. Trim them if necessary. There's a little bit of flashing on it. So these are going to install onto the chassis we're going to need 4 M2.5 by 5 screws, and they should be flathead screws. They're going to be the smallest screws in the bag, in case you're wondering. So these parts are going to install like so. So it looks like there's some nubs on the bottom, or bosses, and those two are going to install here and here, and the screws are going to install in these two holes. And then same thing on the other side, screws in these two holes and the bosses in these two holes. I'm going to flip over the chassis. So you can see that the boss is installed in these 4 holes, and the screws are going to install on these 4 holes here. Use a 1.5 hex driver, and don't over tighten these screws because the plastic is pretty soft. It'll probably be easy to strip out if you're not too careful. So once you feel it shoulder up, it's good. So now we can start setting up our linkage for our steering servo. So we're going to need this little turnbuckle or threaded rod. We're going to need 2 rod ends. So there's a small rod end and a large rod end. And we're going to need a threaded ball. So there's a ball with a threaded shaft on there. And then we're going to need, looks like, just a normal ball. This normal ball is threaded on the inside. So trim if necessary. So there is a small notch on this piece that you can see here. So that notch shows a right hand thread. So in the manual it doesn't quite show that well, but the small rod end should go next to the notch, so that should be a right hand thread. And there's a orientation of the rod end, how it installs. There's a flat on one side that's larger, and that's going to be facing down from what it looks like. Yeah. Okay, so you can assemble this turnbuckle. So there should be a 4mm gap between the rod ends. I'm gonna make sure that the rod ends are on there evenly, and then I will go ahead and measure. It's to see if I'm close to 4 millimeters, and most likely what I'm going to do is adjust the length once it's on the car, because it'll be easier to do that. Looks like I've got about even amount of thread showing on both ends. Okay, so I'm at 6 millimeters, that's fine. I'm gonna go ahead and install this onto the car, and then I'll adjust it. So as I was saying earlier, there's a large flat side, as you can see there, and this side that has like this small bump. So this side will be facing up, and the ball, the small ball, the flange will be facing the top side, like so. So we can go ahead and install that. And then the thread will be facing down. So here's the flange. We're going to install this like so. And notice that there's a large side and a small side. We're actually going to install it from the large side. So I notice if you install it from the small side, it'll cause that ball to bind. Need to adjust this turnbuckle so that that thread on that one ball faces downward. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn that 180. And there we go. So with this done, we can install our steering servo and this onto the servo horn. The servo horn looks like it's somewhat special in the sense that it is made for a flathead screw. Let's see, the servo I'm using is the Protec 170 SBL. Beautiful servo. I love Protec servos. Reliable, very nice quality. Can't go wrong with them. Okay, comes with a shorter lead, but does not come with an aluminum servo horn, unfortunately. I think the 160s come with an aluminum horn. So sad to see that. It'd be nice if it came with one, but I probably think that most people will probably end up getting the aluminum horn that is specific to the vehicle that they're installing the servo in. So what we can do is I know this is a 25 tooth servo, so we can grab our 25 tooth servo horn and trim if necessary. So we're going to install using a M3 by 5 flathead screw. Just going to be this one. It's a very short screw. And since it's going into metal, which I think it's steel, we're going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on this screw so it doesn't back out. Okay, and you can hold back up on the ball with a 2.5 hex and tighten the screw with a 2 millimeter hex. And then just Just wipe off any excess Loctite. And now this assembly is ready to install onto the servo and onto the chassis. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to go ahead and power up the servo using another vehicle, and then I'll know that it's centered and I can install the servo horn on, and it looks like it's going to install slightly off center, like so, kind of like that. So I'm going to go ahead and center this, and I'll be right back. So I have the servo centered. I know it's going to install like so. And we're going to install the servo horn with an M3x8 flathead screw. So in the image, it shows that it's off maybe one tooth. So I'm going to install it like so. That's one tooth from the center line, and then probably have to trim it out. So this is going into metal, so I'm going to add a little bit of blue Loctite, and then go ahead and install this onto the servo horn. There we go. Now we can install the servo mount onto the chassis along with the servo itself. And I am surprised that this servo mount is aluminum. Very, very nice, high quality piece, nicely anodized. You know, I'm pretty amazed that they included this, because most companies don't include a servo mount that is aluminum. They're usually plastic, so very excited about that. So we're going to need 3 M3x10 screws that are flat heads, and we're going to need 1 M3x8 screw, and that is going to install this antenna tube, it looks like. So I'm just gonna scroll ahead a little bit and see. I'm probably not gonna install this piece because I don't have an antenna on the receiver. So let me set this aside for now. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and install this piece. I don't know which receiver I'm gonna be installing yet. So the servo mount is going to install onto the chassis like so, as front of the vehicle. So it's going to install like so. So the screws are going to install in these 3 holes here, and then this little antenna tube piece is going to install in this hole here. So since these 3 screws are going to be going into aluminum, I'm going to go ahead and add some blue Loctite. I'm going to go ahead and flip the chassis. So the 3 holes that we're going to install the screws in are going to be here, and then the antenna tube looking piece is going to install in this hole. Kind of hard to install this because it's hard to prevent this from rotating, since there's really no way to hold on to it. I just stuck some tweezers in there and then kind of hoping it prevents it from rotating. That's installed. Now we can install the servo, and it looks like we're gonna need these spacers. So it looks like we're gonna need all 4 spacers. It looks like a number 3 and a number 4. It looks like that's probably has to do with the thickness, because the 3s are a little thinner than the 4s. Let's get these off and then trim if necessary. So we're gonna install 1 3 and 1 4 on each side. It's kind of what it looks like. We're gonna need 4 M3 by 12 flanged screws. So the flange screws are button heads and they have a small flange on it. So we're gonna need 4 of those. And since they are going into aluminum, we will put some blue Loctite on those. So we're gonna install these spacers like so, and then our servo is gonna install number 3 and number 4 spacer on both sides. Might have been easier to install these spacers and servo with the mount off the car, but we're here now and I'm gonna do this. So just getting the screws started. Can go ahead and install the spacers on this side. Now we need this conical washer, and it doesn't say, but I'm pretty sure it's a M3 lock nut. So the M3 lock nut is going to install onto the steering bell crank, and it's going to install here. There's a cutout for it, so we don't have to hold back up. So I could use some pliers. I'm just going to use my shock pliers to see if I can kind of pop them in there, pop it in there. Yep, that's exactly what I needed. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna install this conical washer with the cone facing up right here. And then we're gonna install the steering arm from the servo through the hole into that nylock nut. And it looks like it's gonna be a 2mm hex to tighten it all down. And you'll feel the nylock nut shoulder up, and we're good. And that thread is in the nylock, so don't need to worry about it backing out. Now we can adjust the length of our turnbuckle. We know that it was 6mm, so we can go ahead and adjust. Basically at 4mm, so I'm gonna call that good. Now I can move on to installing the motor. So I've got the Hobbywing 4274 2250 kV motor to install. Tried installing this motor on the X-Ray, but it was a bit too long. I think on this particular car, there's enough room on the chassis to install it. We got our sensor cables. So I noticed that there are some 1 and 2 numbered spacers for the steering servo, and it says nothing about which one to use in the manual, but my assumption is to make sure that, I mean, you probably want that steering link to be as flat as possible, but at the same time you want to make sure that you have enough room for your servo. And it looks like there's barely any room between the servo and the chassis. I can see some light in it. There's probably 0.5 millimeter or so of room. So if you're using the 170 SBL or 170 servo or full-size servo, probably best with running the 3 and 4 spacers. All right, so we've got our motor. It's going to install like so. Looks like we've got plenty of room for this motor. So we need our little motor mount, and we need 2 M4 by 10 box head screws, and they're showing to kind of mount it like this with the tabs kind of facing the outside of the vehicle. So let's see. Looks like these 2 holes are kind of where I would like to install it. So the orientation of this mount, this cutout here is going to be facing the center of the vehicle, and that's kind of it. Other than that, it looks like everything else is symmetrical. So I'm going to go ahead and install this like so, and I think that'll kind of give me where I want this to be. So since this is going into metal, I'm going to add some blue Loctite, and it's going to be a 3mm Allen. I don't have a 3mm MIP tool, so I just use an Allen from one of my Allen sets. I like to Loctite any screw that's in the motor because I've had them back out. I'm just going to double check to see if, I mean, there's some Loctite on there. So I'll just reinstall it with a little bit of Loctite. Yeah, Tekin motors, I mean, I've seen them back apart, brand new, first run. So definitely, you know, whatever motor you're running, check, make sure that there's Loctite on the screws, because you do not want them to back out and destroy your motor. I've actually had a motor destroyed like that. So now we can install this onto the chassis. So the motor is going to go ahead and slide in like so. And then it looks like it's just going to be held in with 1 screw, which is an M4 by 10, along with this nice little piece here. So we're going to install the M4 by 10 screw into this piece. I think that's just going to help spread the load a bit. Add some blue Loctite since it's going into aluminum. And I don't have a pinion yet, but I'm going to set this, it's going to be a 3mm Allen. I'm going to set this as far out as possible. so that way when I do my wiring, I can make sure that depending on the size of the pinion, I want to make sure I have the motor as far out as possible, so that way I have enough wires if there's ever going to be a pinion change. So, okay. So that's installed. I have plenty of room back here to install the sensor wire. So nice for that. So now we're gonna need, looks like 8 M3x10 screws, last screws that are left in this bag. And then we're going to need our battery stays. And just check to see if there's any trimming necessary. Doesn't really look like it. So these battery stays are going to install with these sections facing the outside of the vehicle. So they're going to install depending on the size of battery, but it looks like they're going to install in these holes, or in this orientation here, or here. Probably going to use a full-size pack, so it looks like they're going to install here and then back here, and we're going to do that on both sides. So on the bottom of the chassis, we're going to install the screws in these two holes and these two holes. All right, with those installed, we can install our ESC. I'm going to be using the XR8 Plus. Nice and beautiful ESC. Comes with the wires needed. Also has heat shrink and a capacitor pack if needed. I'm not going to install the capacitor pack. Let's see how we're going to line this up. I feel like this might have been an afterthought. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of room for the ESC and the receiver. So, okay, so I don't have the receiver yet for this build. But just kind of looking at the placement of where I can put this, I feel like if I put it further back, I have to put it further outboard because of the center gear. Doesn't quite give it a lot of room. I think kind of torn on how I want to install it, but I feel like I'm gonna have to install it as close to the servo as possible. That way I have enough room for the receiver over here. So I'm going to take this antenna piece off because it's kind of in the way, and I think I'll have more room to install the ESC if I remove this piece. I feel like most receivers are antennaless anyway nowadays. So what I'm seeing online is either having it installed like so, with the on-off switch on the outside of the car, and then tightly wrap it around. And this is probably going to have to be installed on top. just because there's really no other place. Or install it like so. I just don't like how close those wires are going to be to the drive shaft. So I think I'm going to install it like so. And that way, the only wire I got to really worry about is the sensor wire. And I can probably route that out this way and around. So that way it's not close to the drive shaft itself. All right, let's go ahead and put some double-sided tape on this. I'm gonna go ahead and clean both surfaces with some rubbing alcohol. All right, so I'd like to have some space between the ESC and the servo. So I'm just gonna put my tweezer handle in between them to get the spacing right. And my plan is to make sure that the ESC really isn't overlapping the out drive here. So looks like it's kind of where it's going to install. Okay, so looking at the way the wires are going to route, I think I want to move this further forward. So I'm going to leave that off for now until I get these wires nicely soldered up. But it looks like the cleanest installation is just going to be like this. I don't have the battery packs I'm going to use yet, but this basically concludes the mechanical part of bag 9. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. And I'll see y'all in the next video where I assemble the shocks and the shock bag. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.